This is my research about exploring the impact of space repetition technique on vocabulary retention beyond exam-centered learning on long-term vocabulary retention in Sri Lankan tuition students aged 8 to 12. So this is my overview. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the background of the study.
Can I see the topic again? You have not included it in the document.
Then followed with that, I'm going to talk about the study area, research problem, research questions, research objectives, literature review, methodology, summary of data analysis, findings, suggestions, and references. So this is the background of the study. So when it comes to the context, the Sri Lankan educational system is heavily exam driven, and this culture extends into tuition centers where students often engage in rote memorization rather than meaningful learning. The problem with this approach is that information is often quickly forgotten after the exam, making it ineffective for long-term vocabulary retention. Educational setting. Tuition centers have become a necessity rather than a supplement in Sri Lanka, with a vast majority of students attending extra classes to enhance their learning. However, these centers predominantly follow the same traditional methods as schools, focusing on drills, repetition, rather than cognitive-based retention strategies. So the target age group is 8 to 12, and I have chosen that age group because that age group is in a critical cognitive development stage where they form foundational vocabulary skills. So at this stage, the brain is highly receptive to structured retention techniques. And therefore, introducing spaced repetition during this period could significantly enhance long-term learning. So therefore, there is a need for change. While spaced repetition has been widely researched and implemented in various educational contexts, its application in Sri Lankan tuition centers remain unexplored. So this study examines whether the spaced repetition can be an effective alternative to rote learning in tuition classes, filling a crucial gap in Sri Lankan education. So here's the research problem, and the core issue is that it drives this research in the inefficiency of traditional rote learning methods in fostering long-term vocabulary retention. And young learners in Sri Lanka often memorize words for exams, but when asked to recall or use them in real-world conversations, they struggle. So this highlights a gap between learning and application. Therefore, this study focuses on how spaced repetition can be integrated in the Sri Lankan tuition centers and how it compares to traditional memorization in terms of repetition and applications. So to explore this issue, there are several research questions that I use, and the first one is, within the field of tuition in Sri Lanka, how does the outdated exam-centered learning affect long-term vocabulary retention in vocabulary of students aged 8 to 12? Research question 2. How does incorporation of spaced repetition as a teaching strategy beyond exam-centered learning impact on long-term vocabulary retention in Sri Lankan students aged 8 to 12? Research question 3. To what extent can spaced repetition as a replacement to exam-centered learning enhance the ability of students in retaining vocabulary in real-world scenarios? Question 4. How do the students aged 8 to 12 and teachers evaluate the efficacy of spaced repetition in improving long-term vocabulary retention with compared to exam-centered approach? Question 5. What are the challenges and benefits in implementing spaced repetition in tuition classes of students aged 8 to 12? So based on these research questions, these are the research objectives. Objective 1. To study how the outdated exam-centered learning affects long-term vocabulary retention in vocabulary of students aged 8 to 12. Research Objective 2. To assess how incorporation of spaced repetition as a teaching strategy beyond exam-centered learning impact on long-term vocabulary retention in Sri Lankan students aged 8 to 12. Objective 3. To examine on what extent can spaced repetition as a replacement of exam-centered learning enhance the ability of students in retaining vocabulary in real-world scenarios. 4. To explore how the students aged 8 to 12 and teachers evaluate the efficacy of spaced repetition in improving long-term vocabulary retention with compared to exam-centered approach. 5. To determine the challenges and benefits in implementing spaced repetition in tuition classes of students aged 8 to 12. So this is the literature review, and I have categorized it according to the broad understanding, proven strategy, Sri Lankan context, and finally narrowing it to the gap. So in broad understanding, memory science has long established that spaced repetition enhances long-term retention, and it works by gradually increasing the time intervals between study sessions, reinforcing memory consolidation. So the proven strategy is that global studies confirm how students use spaced repetition recall information better than who rely on mass learning or cramming. And the effectiveness of this technique has been particularly evident in second language learning environments. And when it comes to Sri Lankan context, there are some researchers that we know, means like already established researchers. It's like spaced repetition is widely recognized as an effective learning strategy. And there are some unknown practices like Sri Lankan tuition centers still focus on rote memorization. And the identified gap is that there is a limited research on spaced repetition in Sri Lankan tuition settings, particularly for vocabulary retention. And what does this study does is to address the gap, and it investigates whether spaced repetition can be a viable alternative to traditional methods in Sri Lankan tuition centers. So this is the study area, and as the study area I have chosen Kurunagala, where I live, and it is a well-known hub for students from multiple districts to attend tuition classes. And as the sample, I have chosen the total target population of 100 students in total from 5 different tuition classes aged 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 separately. So this is the way I collected data. As pre and post test, I check the students' existing knowledge with the pre-test, and then the teaching period continued for 6 weeks in utilizing of spaced repetition technique for teaching vocabulary. And once concluded, a post test was implemented to assess the number of words they retained. Surveys and interviews for students. A short survey was implemented for students to share their perspectives regarding the spaced repetition technique and contrast between the traditional and new approach to assess their improvement of vocabulary. Moreover, randomly selected 20 students were subjected to interviews or meta-analysis on the new approach in real-life scenarios. Feedback from teachers. During the teaching period, the teachers were involved in observation and then collect feedback from them on comparing the two approaches, obtain and give perspectives to ensure the efficacy of the new approach in tuition class setting. And this is the data analysis. As quantitative analysis, I compared the results of pre-test and post-test to explore the vocabulary retention of students before and after the implementation of spaced repetition. And the tests were designed to evaluate 20 vocabulary words taught during the 6-week period. As qualitative analysis, the surveys, interviews of students and feedback of teachers were taken into account in order to provide deeper insights to students' experiences with space repetition. And as a mixed approach, both qualitative and quantitative results were considered to examine a comprehensive evaluation. As a qualitative, it demonstrated a clearly statistically significant improvement in vocabulary retention. And as qualitative, it provided a contextualized insights that highlights the practical benefits and challenges of space repetition in real-world classrooms. So this is the summary of data analysis. Getting the data from qualitative analysis, I use that to explore the vocabulary retention of students before and after the implementation of space repetition. However, the results indicated that there exists a clear improvement in vocabulary retention across all ages following space repetition intervention. Then as qualitative analysis, I use student survey insights and teacher feedback. However, it was used to provide deeper insights to students' experiences with space repetition. So there you can see some percentages, and these results indicated that space repetition is an effective technique for enhancing vocabulary retention, with both students and teachers reporting positive experiences. So the findings of this research is that qualitative findings showed that space repetition significantly improved vocabulary retention in all age groups. And qualitative findings showed that students found space repetition engaging and less stressful than traditional methods. And teachers observed not only student improvement but also enhanced retention for themselves. And also the space repetition created a collaborative learning environment between students and teachers. So these are my suggestions from the research I did, and for the tuition centers I would recommend to integrate space repetition into the English language curriculum, and also to provide training for teachers on how to effectively implement space repetition technique. For future research, I would recommend to expand the study to rural and urban areas to examine contextual differences in retention. And for technology integration, I would love to recommend to explore digital tools like Anki, Quizlet for automated space repetition tailored to individual student needs. And as curriculum development, I hope that this research will bring out an educational materials and across subjects beyond language and learning. So that's it, and these are my references, and thank you.